Right now, somewhere out there, a 19-year-old is buying a $5 iced coffee and a 19-year-old is buying $5 worth of stock. Same amount of money, same day, same bank account size. 30 years from now, one of them owns a car that's worth less than what they paid for it the moment they drove it off the lot. The other one owns a small fortune they barely had to think about. Here's the strange part. Neither of them feels rich or poor today. The $5 doesn't feel like a decision. Feels like nothing. That's exactly why it's so powerful, and exactly why almost nobody takes it seriously. So today we're going to answer a question that sounds too simple to matter. What actually happens to your life if you invest just $5 a day? Not $500. Not some number that requires a six-figure salary. Just $5. The price of a coffee, a snack, a single rideshare tip. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why most people never become wealthy even when they make good money, and why a few people build real wealth even when they don't. The difference isn't the size of the money. It's something much smaller and much sneakier hiding inside how your brain treats small numbers. Let's talk about why $5 feels invisible. Imagine you're standing in line at a convenience store. You see a candy bar for $2. You don't think twice. You don't pull out a calculator. You don't think, this is a financial decision. Your brain files it under harmless. Background noise. The cost of being alive. This is actually how our brains are wired to think about small amounts of money. Psychologists call this kind of thinking mental accounting. It's the idea that we don't treat money as one single pool of value. Instead, we mentally sort it into little boxes. There's the big decisions box, where we think carefully, compare prices, maybe lose sleep over it. Then there's the small stuff box where we barely think at all. A $30,000 car feels like a big decision. We research it, negotiate it, maybe regret it for years. A $5 charge feels like nothing. It doesn't even register as spending. Feels free. Here's the problem. Our financial life isn't actually built from the big decisions. It's built from thousands of tiny ones. The car you finance once is one decision. The $5 you spend without thinking is a decision you make 365 times a year, every single year, for your entire life. Most people believe wealth comes from making one big smart move, landing a high-paying job, picking the right stock, starting a successful business. And sure, those things help, but they're rare, and they're not in everyone's control. What is in your control is what you do with the money that feels too small to matter. And that's exactly the part almost everyone ignores. So let's actually do the math nobody does in their head while standing in line at the store. Let's start with the simplest version of the idea. $5 a day is $35 a week. That's about $150 a month. Across a year, that's roughly $1,825. On its own, that number isn't impressive. You could earn that by working a single weekend shift overtime. Feels small. Feels forgettable. But here's where most people's understanding of money stops, and where the real story actually begins. Money that sits in a bank account stays the same size. Money that gets invested doesn't just sit there. It works. It earns. And then the earnings themselves start earning. This is the part of money that almost nobody is taught in school, and it's the entire reason small amounts can eventually become big ones. Let's use a simple metaphor. Imagine a single snowflake landing on top of a hill. By itself, it's nothing. You could blow it away with one breath. But if that snowflake starts rolling down the hill, it picks up more snow. It gets a little bigger. As it gets bigger, it picks up even more snow faster than before. By the time it reaches the bottom of the hill, that tiny snowflake has become a snowball you couldn't move with your hands. That's what your money does when you invest it consistently over a long period of time. The financial term for this snowball effect is compound growth. But forget the term. Just remember the hill. Your money rolls, picks up more. The more it picks up, the faster it grows. Time is the hill. The longer the hill, the bigger the snowball gets by the time it reaches the bottom. Now here's where it gets interesting. Let's say you invest that $5 a day into something that grows at an average pace similar to how the stock market has historically grown over long periods, somewhere around 8 to 10% a year on average, even with ups and downs along the way. After 10 years, your small, forgettable $5 a day turns into something in the rough range of $27,000 to $29,000. After 20 years, because the snowball has had more hill to roll down, it turns into something in the rough range of $89,000 to $100,000. After 30 years, that same boring $5 a day can realistically grow into the range of $220,000 to $280,000, depending on how the market performs along the way. Read that again. $5 a day. Less than what a lot of people spend on lunch without thinking. Turning into a number that could change someone's retirement, pay off a home, or fund a child's education. This is not a guarantee, and the market doesn't move in a straight line. Some years it grows a lot, some years it shrinks, and a few years it might even drop significantly before recovering. But historically, over long stretches of time, patient, consistent investing has trended upward. The estimates we just walked through aren't a promise. They're a reasonable illustration of what consistency, combined with time, has tended to do. So why doesn't everyone do this if the math is so favorable? This is where we leave the spreadsheet and step into psychology, because the real obstacle was never the math. It was always the mindset. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Most people don't fail to build wealth because they don't make enough money. They fail because of how their brain is wired to react to two things: boredom and the size of numbers. Let's talk about boredom first. Investing $5 a day is, quite honestly, boring. There's no rush, no big win, no dramatic moment where you suddenly feel rich. You invest it and then nothing visibly happens. Day 1 looks the same as day 100. This is where most people quietly give up, not because it failed, but because it felt like it was doing nothing. Our brains crave evidence that something is working. We want to see progress, like a video game leveling up in real time. But wealth building doesn't work like a video game with constant visual feedback. It works more like a tree growing. If you stare at a tree for an hour, it looks exactly the same. But check back in 10 years, and it's unrecognizable. The problem is, nobody enjoys staring at a tree, so people stop watering it long before it ever grows. Now let's talk about the size of numbers, because this is the deeper psychological trap. There's a well-known concept in behavioral psychology that explains why a problem labeled small gets ignored. Even when ignoring it repeatedly creates a massive outcome. It's the gap between what something costs once and what it costs over time. Our brains are excellent at evaluating single moments and terrible at evaluating repetition. If someone offered to sell you a financial habit that will cost you $219,000 over your lifetime, you'd say absolutely not. That's insane. But if you frame the exact same habit as just a $5 coffee, just for today, it sails right past your mental defenses. Same outcome, completely different decision, purely because of how it's framed in the moment. This is also why advertising rarely says, "This will cost you thousands over the years." It always says just $5. Businesses understand this psychological blind spot extremely well. The financial industry, and frankly your own daily habits, are constantly speaking in small numbers because small numbers don't trigger caution. They trigger comfort. So here is the deeper idea hiding underneath all of this. Wealth isn't really built or destroyed by a few big financial decisions. It's built or destroyed by thousands of tiny decisions that never feel important enough to examine. The person who becomes financially comfortable later in life usually isn't the person who made one brilliant move. It's the person who simply respected small amounts of money enough to let them grow, instead of letting them disappear into things they don't even remember buying. And here's the flip side that makes this even more interesting. The exact same psychological blind spot that causes people to waste $5 a day without noticing is the same blind spot that lets people invest $5 a day without feeling deprived. The habit is so small it doesn't feel like sacrifice. You're not telling your brain, give up something major. You're tricking the same mental shortcut that usually works against you into working for you instead. This is the real insight. You don't build wealth by becoming a different person who suddenly has superhuman discipline. You build wealth by redirecting a habit so small that your brain doesn't put up a fight. So what does this actually mean for your life starting today? First, stop waiting to feel ready to invest. A lot of people convince themselves they'll start investing once they make more money. But the habit of investing small amounts consistently matters more right now than the size of the amount itself. $5 done consistently for 30 years will, in most realistic scenarios, outperform $500 invested randomly and inconsistently for 5 years. Consistency beats intensity almost every time when it comes to building wealth slowly. Second, find your own version of the $5. It doesn't have to be coffee. It might be one and used subscription. It might be ordering food delivery one less time a week. It might be the gap between a name brand item and the generic version sitting right next to it on the shelf. The goal isn't to deprive yourself of every small joy in life, because that approach almost always backfires and leads to burnout. The goal is to become aware of at least one small leak and redirect it on purpose instead of letting it leak out unnoticed. Third, understand that boring is the entire point. If investing felt thrilling every day, it would probably mean you were taking unnecessary risks. The version of investing that actually builds long-term wealth for most ordinary people is supposed to feel uneventful. Boring, steady, and repetitive is the price of admission for a process that historically rewards patience over excitement. And fourth, give it time on purpose. Time isn't the side effect of this strategy. Time is the strategy. The earlier someone starts, even with a tiny amount, the more hill that snowball has to roll down. Someone who starts small at 20 often ends up further ahead than someone who starts big at 40, purely because of how many years the snowball had to grow. You don't need a financial windfall to start. You don't need to understand complicated investment products. You need a small, repeatable habit and the patience to let it run quietly in the background of your life for years. So let's go back to that idea from the beginning. The 19-year-old buying coffee and the 19-year-old buying $5 of investments. On the outside, nothing about their lives looks different today. Same age, same small amount of money, same ordinary day. But money doesn't ask whether a decision felt important when you made it. It only responds to what you consistently did with it. Most people aren't poor because of one bad decision. And most people aren't wealthy because of one brilliant decision either. Wealth in most ordinary lives is simply the final, quiet result of thousands of small decisions, repeated long enough for time to take them seriously, even when we didn't. So the next time $5 passes through your hands without a second thought, ask yourself one simple question. Is this $5 about to disappear, or is it about to start rolling down the hill? Because 30 years from now, that single answer, repeated daily, might be the entire difference between a life you settled for and a life you quietly built.